Okay, so I guess we'll get started. So my name is Dru Lavigne. I'm at IX Systems. We do a lot of the development for the FreeNAS product, which is an open source, and we also provide hardware and support for those using it in the enterprise. And I'm the lucky person who gets to write all the documentation. So today we're going to talk about what's new in FreeNAS 9.3. For those of you who have not heard of FreeNAS yet, it is an open source network attached storage. It is based on FreeBSD and it is released under a BSD license. The latest version is 9.3, which was released the first week of December. And we'll be talking a little bit about the concept of stable and why it is that you want to be running stable. So 9.3 stable is the latest version. Just do a quick overview of some of the core features before we get into what's new with FreeNAS. So if you haven't used FreeNAS before, it does use OpenZFS as its file system, which is the continuation of ZFS that started at Solaris and is now under the OpenZFS Foundation. And OpenZFS strives to be multi-platform. So people who work on ZFS for Linux, the Illumos people, Nexenta, FreeBSD, anybody using ZFS is typically using OpenZFS. So the development is continuing and new features are being added. So if you've heard that ZFS died, it did not. It's very much alive and well. ZFS is particularly suited for storage because it was designed from the ground up to be a self-healing file system, and it's particularly suited for storage. If you're looking at what is it can I do with this storage device, you can pretty well share it from any type of operating system. Built into it, we do have the sharing protocols. So we have Samba for your Windows clients. We have AppleTalk for Mac. We can do NFS shares. We also support iSCSI, and there's different ways you can access the device. You can go in through a share. You can go in through FTP, either insecure or secure. You can use SSH. So very easy to access the data on the device. You can create user accounts if you're in a very small network, but typically, especially if you're in an enterprise environment, you're already running some sort of directory service. So you can import in all of your Active Directory users. If you're using LDAP, you can import those users. And for those of us still using NIS, it also integrates with NIS. It supports replication of data between systems, and we use rsync and SSH. One of the features is ZFS is the ability to take point-in-time snapshots of what your storage looks like. Those can be automated to occur when you want them to, and to optionally be replicated to another system in case you ever have a disaster and you need to restore your data. ZFS also uses something called scrubs, which methodically goes through your disks and lets you know if you have any bad blocks or any corrupted data. And if you have redundancy, it will attempt to fix that for you. And it'll also notify you that it has found some bad blocks. Those of you familiar with FreeBSD, we have things known as sysctls, which you can use to tune a system while it's live. You can directly interact with the kernel. We have things known as loaders, where you can load various kernel modules or drivers at boot up. And we've all heard of cron, and we know how fun it is to set up a cron job. So we have in our graphical user interface ways to easily set those up. We also have reporting graphs that will let you know your disk usage, your CPU usage, your network stacks. If your drives are smart capable, you can schedule your smart tests. And we also have an automated alert system, and we support UPSs. A couple of more features. We do support link aggregation. Failover is available, and we also support VLAN tagging. There's support for DDNS. There's SNMP MIPS and TFTP support. We do have a control panel where you can look at all your services and start and stop them and see their status. And we support OS X Time Machine and Windows Shadow copies or previous versions. And the last of the core features, the operating system itself is always separate from your storage disks. So that means if there's a problem with the operating system, it's not going to affect your data. And your OS can be installed typically in a home environment. It's on a USB stick, but it also supports being installed to flash cards, SSDs, SATA-DOMs, something smaller media that's separate from your storage. We're going to be talking about the new upgrade process, and one of the new features is it always keeps a backup of the version of the OS. So if you update, you can actually roll back if there's a problem with the update. We're going to take a closer look at that. FreeNAS itself is meant to be administered through a web browser, so we have a nice little administrative graphical interface. For those of us who grew up at the command line, there's also a web shell so that you can interact with the system through the command line. This last point is actually going to change this month. So we have always published a user's guide with every version of the OS, and it's been available online. In about the next week or so, we are putting the docs right into the OS itself. So we'll actually open a offline tab so you can read the documentation. So it's going to be in a software update in the next week or so. So let's take a look at what's new. I'll start with the most exciting stuff first, and this is a feature that we get with ZFS. So ZFS supports something called boot environments, and a boot environment is a snapshot of your operating system. And because we have the capability of snapshotting what your operating system looks like, that means we can make changes to the operating system, and if need be, go back to a previous version. One of the things that FreeNAS traditionally did before 9.3 was your boot device itself was formatted with UFS, and it didn't support a mirrored boot device or provide the benefits of ZFS. So we've changed that, so the boot device is now formatted with ZFS, and you can, if you want, you can install to a mirrored device, or you can start with one device and turn it into a mirror later on. So both of those are supported. We're using Grub as the boot menu, and we've modified Grub so that it can support boot environments. It will actually list your previous versions of the operating system. We have a new boot manager, which we're going to take a look at. It allows you yourself to create a boot environment anytime you want to. So if you yourself are going to make changes to the OS, and as you start to accumulate boot environments, you can prune the ones that you know you don't need to boot into anymore. So you don't have to keep these things forever. We have a new update manager that automatically creates boot environments for you, so you don't have to remember to do that before you do an update. And like magic, your old version of the OS just shows up in Grub. So very easy to revert. So let's take a look at how that looks in 9.3. And again, I'm not sure how well you can see this, so you may want to look at your own copy from the URL. So we have a new screen in system called boot, and that's our boot manager. And when you install FreeNAS, it automatically creates two boot environments for you. So it's going to create a boot environment called default, which is the one that you boot into, and it's the one that you're running. We also create something called the initial install, which initially looks the same as default, but this is a pristine environment. So if you ever go and totally mangle your OS, you know that you can go back to what it should have looked like at a fresh install, no matter what you've done to your default environment. So you'll always have those two. If we take a look at what some of the available things are in Boot Manager, so you can go and create your own boot environment at any time. You just click that button. It's going to ask you to give it a name. So you give it a name that's useful to you, and it will automatically be added as an entry. You can go and scrub your boot device. So it is running ZFS, so you can actually go and check to see if there's any bad blocks on your boot device. This happens automatically every 35 days, and if you don't want it to happen automatically, you can just uncheck the box and then just do it whenever you want to. You can also check the status of the boot device. So it'll actually tell you if it's degraded, and if you have a mirror, if the mirror is degraded. Down here, if you have a boot device highlighted, you can rename it to something that's more useful to you. You'll notice the one that you boot into is under the active one, and it's actually set now to say that the next time I reboot, I will also go into this boot one. If I decide to say, no, I really want to reboot into this one, this will say on reboot, and the old one will say now, because it's indicating that right now that's what you're into. You can delete, if you start getting a whole bunch of these, you can pick one and delete it, but whatever you're set to boot from, it won't let you delete it. You'll have to activate something else. Yes?
Is there a check for space remaining on the boot device?
That's something that we have to put in because people are finding that they're forgetting to prune their boot environments. Yeah. So we have a feature request for that right now. And then you can also clone boot devices. That's a good question. So one of the things that we're recommending, so FreeNAS, typically we just said 4 gig USB device is plenty for your boot. We're recommending that 4 will still work, but you only fit about 2 boot environments. So we're recommending 8. And it's starting to make more sense to throw one of your SSDs or a SATA DOM at it. So that way you don't have to worry about running out of space. Here's an example of the grub menu, and in this one we actually have a third entry. So we're going to be talking about the new setup wizard, and if you do run the wizard, it will also take a copy of what it looked like after you set it up. So this one actually has 3 entries. And if you ever need to roll back, you just reboot, pick the one you want, and you boot into that. This gives us a lot of advantages. So anybody who's been on the FreeNAS roller coaster before knows that the 921 series was a little bit painful. We actually ended up with 9219, that many point releases in, just addressing bugs and the various things that happened. Now that we have the ability to make snapshots, we don't really need point releases. So why should I have to wait for the FreeNAS team to roll something if there's an OpenSSL vulnerability, say, or if bug fixes are fixed, or if there's new drivers available. Instead of doing point releases, we now have the concept of something called trains. And I'm actually going to skip ahead and show you what that screen looks like. So this again is in System, and we're now in the Update tab. And trains was apparently a term that came out of Apple, and because Jordan Hubbard is with us, he liked the term trains. But basically, you can hop on a train and you can follow that software track. Right now we have 3 available, and if I'm running FreeNAS in production, what I want to be running is stable. Stable is going to be all of the bug fixes, all of the new features, all of the new drivers that have been tested. So we don't roll a stable, or what we call a software update, until we've given enough testing to be pretty sure it's not going to break someone in production. It's fortunately not a huge deal if something goes wrong, because you can reboot and go back. but we do testing to try to make sure that that's not going to happen in production. We also have something called nightlies, and this is also useful. So let's say, for example, you find a bug and you submit a bug report and the developer fixes it. What he'll ask you to do is to switch to the nightly train so you can get that fix and you can test it and report back. The nice thing is, because we have copies of our operating systems, you can do that test and test that fix and then reboot back to your latest stable so that you're running in production again. So it makes it very convenient for that. But if for pure production purposes, you shouldn't be running nightlies, not unless you're beta testing or you're testing a fix. It's early days yet for FreeNAS 10. It rarely builds at this point in time because it's still in the design phase and it's under extremely active development. But in about 3 months or so, we're going to start hitting the alpha pre-beta stage. And for those of you that have spare hardware and want to try it out, you can follow the nightly train and again submit bug reports and do testing. So that's something that will be available. It also means in about 9 months from now, when FreeNAS 10 is released, if you want to upgrade, all you have to do is this will change to FreeNAS 10 stable, and you switch trains, and then your system will be running 10. So moving forward, this is going to be a very slick way of doing things. If we go back to the previous screen, so that's the concept of following different types of trains. So basically, as new stuff becomes available, if you're following stable, which is what you should be doing if you're running in production, whenever a new software update is rolled, so that means we have a bunch of fixes that we've tested and we're sure it's not going to break production, you will get your alert icon will flash, and you'll also get an email to your root user account, and it will indicate that there's new software available. The nice thing about this is it tells you when it's available, but it's up to you when you decide you want to apply it. And I'll show you how you can go and do that. This has an advantage of anybody who's done updates before in FreeNAS. You know, you got to go and you got to find the upgrade file, and you got to find the checksum for it and put all that stuff in. You don't have to do that anymore. So if we go back to that update tab, we have, once you're on a train, whatever train you're on, you have a Check Now button, and it will go and check to see if there's any updates available. And if updates are available, you're going to get a screen that looks something like that. It's going to tell you what's going to be in that update. And there's basically 2 different types of formats. So you'll see something with a hash followed by a number, and that's actually the number of the bug in the bug ticketing system that was fixed. So you can actually go to bugs.freenas.org and you can read and look at the code that was changed, if that's something that you like to do. We also have things that don't start with a hash. That's actually the git commit number. So for example, this one was the fix for the recent NTP exploit. So you can go in and see the patch that's going to be applied. Right now we're working on providing updates that don't require you to reboot, and we're probably a couple of weeks away from that. So right now you do have to reboot to apply updates. So we have a little checkbox here that says you can download now but not apply them now. So you can go in and read these and say, yeah, I'm going to want to do these, but since users are connected right now, I don't want to apply the update. So you can just uncheck this box, and when you're ready to apply the update, say it's after hours, you can just go in and do the apply pending updates. So if you've already downloaded them, they'll be displayed here, and it's just waiting for you to apply them when it's convenient to do so. And it will go and reboot the system when it's ready. So it's our new update manager. Any questions on that before we leave? Yep. At this point, no. So basically, when you're ready to reboot, you say apply them now. Okay. Since they're already downloaded, it's very quick. It's just basically creating your boot environment, applying, and then rebooting. So it's about less than a 5-minute process. Yep.
Did you use the at command to schedule a reboot? Is at in part of FreeNAS?
Yeah, no, AT's built in, and I haven't heard anybody say they've tried it, but that'd be interesting. I'm sure there's people who have croned it. So this update is just a script, which I'm sure would be easy to cron as well. Okay. One of the things we found with previous versions of FreeNAS, we used to have, I don't know, an 8-page quick start guide, which you basically had to read through to figure out this is what I need to do to set up my system. So we said, why make people read 8 pages if we can give them a pretty wizard that'll do it for them? So we created a configuration wizard. So when you install FreeNAS 9.3, the first time you boot into it, the wizard automatically runs, and you don't have to use it. You can exit out of it. And we also added a new wizard icon, so if you want to use it later, you can do so. This will automatically either import an existing pool or assist you in creating a new pool if you have fresh disks. One of the coolest things about it is setting up shares can be a nightmare when people start clicking on things. So we found that people creating shares, they would start mucking with permissions, and they didn't know how many data sets to make, and it was a complex process. So what we've done is we've added a sharing wizard that will set up defaults that just work, and then from there you can fine-tune if you want to. So if you want to muck about with them. But if you just want to go in and create, a couple of CIF shares and an NFS share and some iSCSI shares, just do the clicky thing and they'll just work. So that's part of the new wizard. We also, people were forgetting to read to the end of the Quick Start Guide where it said to set up the email address to receive notifications. So we put that right in the wizard so they don't forget to do that. Because you do want to know when the FreeNAS system has something to tell you. So the wizard itself, this is the initial screen where you set up your volumes. If you have no idea what you're doing and you just have some disks in there, you can just give it a pool name, say automatic, and it will pick the most logical thing to do with the number of drives that you gave it. If you know what you're doing, you can decide whether to do a RAID Z1, RAID Z2, RAID Z3. So it's we're trying to make it appeal to people who don't know what they're doing as well as people who do. The initial sharing wizard will let you set up your CIFs, Apple, NFS, and iSCSI shares. For those that just want to set up a quick guest window share, there's a nice little checkbox for that. Otherwise, you can go in and start creating users and setting permissions. And for those who are only interested in setting up Time Machine for their Mac boxes, you just check the little box and like magic Time Machine works. And you can go in and create as many shares as you want, and it'll go and do that for you. Last screen is setting up the administrative email, and it basically lets you do all of that stuff. You can also choose to see the console messages at the bottom of the screen, because a lot of people find that useful when they're troubleshooting. So those are the two big major changes, and probably the sexiest of the changes. There was a lot of stuff that went into 9.3 that wasn't in the 9.2 series, so the rest is just sort of a high-level overview. The UI, we tried to reorganize it. We only did it up to a certain amount because 10 is going to be totally different. We actually got real UI people to make a UI for us, so hopefully it'll be make much more sense. But one of the biggest things we did was to try to prevent users who weren't sure what they were doing from shooting themselves in the foot. So for all of the configuration screens, the ones that you shouldn't really be touching unless you really know what you're doing, we moved those into an advanced mode. So anything that you see in a config screen, you have to configure, and anything hitting in advanced mode you probably don't have to do unless you really know what you're doing. We also added a task section for scheduling tasks. So this is where you schedule your smart tasks and your scrubs and that sort of stuff. So it made a little bit more sense to do it that way. Other than that, the UI sort of looks the same. The one nice thing that they did that was really irritating in previous versions of FreeNAS, if you opened up a screen, it would add it to the tab, and you could end up with 30 tabs open. That doesn't happen anymore, so that's one of the irritating things that got removed. This one is really handy. So a lot of the services in FreeNAS accept encryption, and most people couldn't make a certificate to save their life, or else they have to go looking for that how-to that they used 3 years ago that actually helped them to make a certificate to figure out how to use the OpenSSL command. So what we did is we added a graphical portion where you could make your own certificate authority, and then you could go and either create your own certificates, you could sign your own certificates, or you could import existing certificates. The nice thing about doing this is all of these services that support certificates, as soon as you create or import them, they appear in the drop-down menu of available certificates. So it makes it much easier to set up encrypted services. GUI is actually fairly easy to use, so we have one called CAs. You can't start making certificates or signing them until you have a certificate authority, so this allows you to create your own. If you're in an enterprise environment and you already have an existing CA, you can just import the CA as well as its certificates. So you can import or create. You can also be part of a certificate chain, so you don't have to just be a standalone certificate authority. For Certificate Manager, you can go in and create, import, and self-sign. So again, you just sort of follow the point and clicks, and you get certificates made. One of the things people have been wanting for a long time is the ability to do WebDAV, so you can actually see what's on your FreeNAS system. So it's easy to create WebDAV shares, and you can either keep them as browse only or use a WebDAV client if you want them to be writable. And again, this you can specify what type of authentication, and these are always authenticated, so people aren't going to find your data by mistake. And you can specify alternate port numbers and whether or not to use encryption. One of the nice things, especially if you're in an enterprise environment, is we've gone from the userland ISTGT, which we were using for iSCSI, to the new kernel iSCSI. And this gave us a lot of benefits. And one of the biggest benefits if you are in a VMware environment is we have full support for VAAI, which means if you can use your VMware as a data store, and if you're using iSCSI, you're going to get things like unmap, so it's actually going to know that you've deleted data. If you're using Windows shares, you're not going to have to copy things over the network to just go from one folder to another, so that's called ODX. And it also gave us support for Windows 2012 clustering. So just having kernel iSCSI gave us a lot of benefits. We now have NFS version 4 support, and it does support Kerberos. We've added the LLDP protocol, so you can discover the Ethernet devices on your network. One of the limitations of 9.2 is you could only integrate with one directory service. Now that we have SSSD built in, you can connect to multiple directory services. And SNMP, we're now using Net SNMP, which gives us availability to more MIBs. because we were using BSNMP, was a very limited set of MIBs. So you should have full MIB support. Previous versions, you couldn't set any rc.comp variables, which could be very limiting. So this you can now do in the tunable section. Previous versions, you had to upgrade your pool from the command line. You can now do this right from the GUI. And in previous versions, you had to grow your iSCSI loons from the command line. Now, if there's zvols, you can just do that right from the zvol screen. Just bump up the number, and it automatically grows to the new size. IP version 6 support was pretty flaky in previous versions, so now you can access the GUI through IP version 6. And we now also have the ability in the GUI to integrate with Kerberos realms and to import Kerberos key tabs. So if you're using Kerberized versions of the services. Again, as you create a realm or import a key tab, all of the services that support Kerberos will have a realm and a key tab drop-down menu where you can select your realms and your key tabs. Okay, so now we just have some resources. Pretty soon docs is going to be archival only because the docs will be right in with the product, the offline version. But we do have forums. We have very active bug system and obviously a website. We're also on Freenode. And I'll go back to this screen, and we have a good 10-15 minutes for questions. If anyone has questions. Yes?
You said you can access API stuff.
Yes.
Normally, the iSCSI presents a raw block storage.
Yes.
And your manual line, you format it.
Right.
So how does that will be on top of the ZFS, or?
Correct. But the nice thing with that is you still get all the benefits of ZFS on the back-end store. But as far as the client is concerned, they think it's an NTFS file system, say. Okay.
Does Samba handle the CSS?
Samba? So the sharing protocol has no idea what the underlying storage is. So it's just a way of seeing data. So it doesn't matter that it's ZFS. Yep. There's a question in the back. Yep.
Does the SMB support extend beyond the ETA name, or is it just the base MIB comes up from that?
So we have the built-in MIBs that come with FreeBSD as well as the NET SNMP ones, and we have added ones that are specific to ZFS because a lot of people wanted to query ZFS stuff. Okay. Yep.
What are the RAM guidelines for building
Yep.
a FreeNAS server?
Yeah, so we recommend 8 gigs minimum, and it really depends upon what you're using the box for and what your performance expectations are. So if you're a home user running, you have your home computers using FreeNAS as the back end, we've had people say it works on 4. It's just not fast, but we recommend at least 8. We have a lot of home users that are using Plex, and Plex is RAM hungry, so for that we recommend at least 16. And if you have a lot of capacity, usually the baseline is, again, I'm terrible with numbers. What is it, 1 gig per terabyte storage? Yeah. Yeah.
So that still applies.
Yes. Yep. No, ZFS still likes its RAM, so. Yep.
So on your boot drive, which is usually in this replenish what you're saying, that will automatically duplicate? Does that mean you put in a second USB flash drive?
Yes, you can mirror it. So with because previous versions of FreeNAS were UFS, you have to actually do an initial install of 9.3. So what we suggest is if you're already running FreeNAS, back up your config in the GUI. And we only support ZFS now. So if you're using UFS now, you'll have to create a pool first and then import your UFS data. Assuming you already have a ZFS pool, that metadata will easily be read. So put in the number of boot devices that you want. You can start with one and add another one later, or you can do both now. And during the install, the installer will let you select multiple boot devices.
In that case, if you're booting off a USB drive, does it have facilities in the boot to mirror to a second stick?
Yeah, so in that boot menu where that boot status button was, if you go into boot status, it'll show that right now you have one device, and there will be a button that will say attach device, and you can attach your second device. Now, I've had people, usually what I recommend is just do a second install and select both devices, because that way you don't have to resilver, because an install takes about 2 minutes. If you're adding another device, I've had some people say, especially if it's USB 2, it could take 2 hours to resilver 8 gigs. It's pretty slow. But that's up to you.
And obviously, for redundancy's sake, what group of changes that you would be making on your FreeNAS system would require you to recreate your secondary or your mirror boot device?
So
Creating new pools or?
no. So the only advantage to having a mirrored boot device, so especially if you're using a thumb drive, they're notorious for not living forever. So it does mean that if one device fails, the next time you reboot, you're not going to have to do an install. You can just reboot, and then you can attach a second device. So the only time you really notice a boot mirror is when you boot. If the one and only boot device fails, you're not going to boot. And then you're going to be scrambling, I have to find install files and all that. So that's the only advantage of a boot device. Now, in an enterprise environment, there's a bit more of advantage, because it usually means you have a lot less downtime. Right? Yep.
Fiber channel or CLE support in the future?
It's coming. So right now, it really depends upon the hardware. We do have Easter egg support for some fiber channel, and I'm terrible with driver names. But if you asked on the forums, they would tell you which ones have Easter egg support. There's been a lot of work in FreeBSD head to add fiber channel support, so I would expect 10 to have better support. Yep. So that's interesting. So unfortunate for the open source community, Sun got purchased by Oracle before they open sourced ZFS encryption. So the only people who have ZFS encryption is Oracle, which is not going to make it into the open source community. What FreeNAS did about 1.5 years ago is it relies on FreeBSD's geom, disk-based. So you can encrypt your disks, but that has advantages and disadvantages. So you're not doing it at the file system level. So you can't, for example, encrypt individual data sets, which is something you'd be able to get from Oracle. It also means that once the system is booted up, encryption doesn't mean anything, because once you've entered your passphrase, you're in on the system. So the really only good use case for encrypted disks is if someone steals the physical media, or if you don't want to RMA the disks before you dispose of them. So that's right now, that's the only useful use case.
Is that being worked on?
So OpenZFS, I know they talk about it a lot, but right now it's not on the roadmap. So they have other fish to fry right now. So it would be nice. Okay, anyone else? Okay, thank you.